Hi, my name is Bob Wheeler, and welcome to the Berean Observer, where we search the scriptures daily to see whether or not these things are true. We, we want to deal with the question, does God really exist? We're living in a time when there are many people raised in evangelical homes that are falling away from the faith, they're deconstructing, and the surrounding culture is becoming increasingly secularized. Um, People try to argue that the separation of church and state means separation of the separation from freedom from religion, and the result is that we're seeing a tremendous amount of social chaos as a result. So that raises a very, very good question: how do we know that God actually exists? And skeptics claim that there is no evidence for the existence of God. You can't see him, you can't touch him, you can't hear his voice, you can't hear the sound of him. So how do we know that God actually exists? And of course, I think part of the problem is that they try to explain the account for the existence of the physical world through like the theory of evolution, and we'll discuss that in a future video somewhere else. But I would argue that the question is, how do we know that God then really exists? And I would argue that the proof of the existence of God is literally as plain as the nose on your face. When you get up in the morning and you look at yourself in the mirror, ask yourself this question: why is your face symmetrical? Why is nearly every human being's face symmetrical? Why are the faces of animals all symmetrical? Do you mean to tell me that all happened purely by accident? And the answer is no. So I think that first of all, what we need to do is to take a look at the order and the complexity of the universe as a whole. And first of all, there's the fine-tuning of the earth. In order for life to even be possible here on the earth, there's a variety of physical circumstances that have to all come together and be coordinated with each other. You have to have the right combination of light and heat. The earth has to be just exactly the right distance away from the sun. There has to be the right combination of gravity, of air, and of water in order to make life sustainable here on earth. And then there's the complexity of the human organism by itself. You've got the respiratory, the circulatory, the nervous, the digestive, and immune systems. Each one is complex in its own right, and yet they all somehow work together as an organic whole in order to make us possible for us to function as living, functional organisms. The and then, of course, there's just the effect that's interesting. You could be a medical student and spend your years studying, medicine, and still not be able to understand everything that there is in the human body. That's how complex and amazing the human body is. I remember one time being in a convenience store eating a lunch, and there was a guy sitting over in the next table, and he had an artificial limb. Okay, and so basically it had the pulleys and the cables. And so basically what the evolutionists are going to wind up arguing is that the artificial limb, the one where the cables and the pulley was kind of clumsy and awkward, that was the one that was made by design. Whereas the perfectly normal, healthy arm, happened purely by accident. Okay, go figure. All right. Then, of course, there's just the sheer immensity of the universe, the sun, the moon, the stars, and the distant galaxies. And so it is that, the Bible exclaims in Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. All of it shows the work of an intelligent designer. And then there's our own, we look at ourselves and our own unique position as human beings. And here's where I think we're going to see as we go ahead and we explain, some of the weaknesses in atheism going forward. Well, the thing about it is that they have a hard time explaining what makes us different from animals. Unlike animals, we have the ability to think abstractly, to reason, to make decisions, and to communicate verbally. We have a moral sense of right and wrong. None of those things are true of animals. So how did we wind up acquiring all of these faculties? And so again, in Psalm 8, verses 4 and 5, it says, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the Son of Man that you visit him? For you have made him a little lower than the angels, you have crowned him with glory and honor. So how in the world did we as human beings wind up coming to be so different from just ordinary animals? Well, What we know, based on actual observation, is that order does not spontaneously arise out of chaos, nor does life arise from non-life. Then basically what this boils down to is what is sometimes referred to as the watchmaker argument that was advanced by William Paley a couple of hundred years ago. He talked about how that if you're walking along on the beach and you find a watch buried in the sand and you pull it out, it's pretty obvious when you look at the watch that it had to have been designed by a human being. Okay, that there had to be an intelligent designer behind it. Something that complex and functional just doesn't happen by itself, by accident. Now, of course, then you have some people who raise the objection, yeah, but if it was found in the sand, then the sand proves that, the world wasn't created by an intelligent supreme being. Well, no. The sand itself has some chemical and has a chemical and molecular structure, and basically, Paley was simply using that as an analogy. That basically, that the watch is comparably more complex and functional than the sand around it, as he had concluded that the watch had to have been made an intelligent being. So then, when you stand back and you look at the universe as a whole, with all of its complexity and order and structure, then it's obvious that that could not have happened by accident. There had to have been an intelligent designer behind it. For people to try to deny that is a little bit like going to the Louvre and looking at the Mona Lisa hanging on the wall and then trying to deny that it was painted by a painter. Obviously, something like that's not going to come into existence unless a painter actually sat down and painted it. And if that is true of a two-dimensional figure mounted on the wall of a museum, how much more true is of the universe in which we live? But then somebody would argue, but what about the dysfunctional aspects of nature? The death, the disease, and the natural disasters. If the world was really designed by a benevolent God, then why in the world did he allow these things to happen? Either he's incompetent, or he didn't know what he was doing, or he's just plain evil. Well, of course, the biblical answer to that is that all of that is God's judgment on a fallen, sinful world. And we'll explain that again in future videos as well. But that doesn't mean that somehow or other that the world of the universe as a whole wasn't created by an intelligent supreme being. It's a little bit like going to a junkyard and looking at a car in the junkyard and then trying to argue, well, that obviously wasn't designed by an engineer, because no engineer would design it with, two of the wheels falling off and the hood all dented. Well, no, that's not the way the engineer designed it. That's the way the world came in. That's the way the car came into, the condition that the car came into subsequent. But there's still enough obvious structure and design in the car to point for the fact that it had to have been designed by an engineer. And so the biblical creation of the biblical account of creation in the fall, I think, best accounts for both the function and the dysfunction of the universe. That on the one hand, the fact that the universe is functional at all, I think, points to the fact that there had to have been an intelligent creator behind it. And yet at the same time, we see that it's dysfunctional. And what we have to do is look into our own hearts and see that the problem ultimately is with us, that it's a judgment from God on nature. So what it comes down to is that either God exists or he doesn't exist. And if he doesn't exist, then we have to come up with some kind of an alternative explanation of reality, and they all come up short. And we'll be exploring some of those in the weeks to come as well. You get a lot of these atheist YouTubers, and they go into these long rants and tirades about how terrible the God of the Bible is and how terrible religion is and how harmful it is. The problem with the argument is that the emperor has no clothes. What does atheism have to offer as a result? Nothing but a meaningless, purposeless existence in an amoral universe, and in which there are no, ultimate standards of right and wrong. And so I would basically argue that the reason why I'm a professing Christian, I like to quote St. Anselm, who said, "Credo ut intelligam." I believe that I might understand. That I think that the Bible offers a far more satisfactory and fulfilling explanation of life and reality than any alternative theory that you can come up with. And so we'll be exploring those in the future. And again, this is something that I kind of discuss in my book, The Case for Evangelical Christianity. It's available on Amazon, and I'm not the Robert Wheeler that wrote the books on Jim Thorpe, but we'll try to explain this again in the future. I think it's an important topic because right now Western civilization is facing a real crisis. Because of secularization, we're looking at the collapse of civilization. We're looking at the breakdown of public morality. We're looking at the disintegration of the family structure. And so some of these basic fundamental existential questions are absolutely crucial and critical. And that's what we need to consider in the days going forward. So I hope that you'll come back, stay tuned, and as we continue to explore the subject. Thank you very much for watching. Bye.